here today for Lawnfawn and welcome back to the channel. Today I have a Christmas card to share with you all. I'm going to be mixing lots of different sets together today to create a really fun scene. I'm going to start off with a creature with stirring, and I'm going to be using the little mice and a few of the gingerbread house and one of the cakes and things. I'm also going to be using You're Just My Type, and I'm just going to be using the desk out of this stamp set as counters. I'm also going to be using Winter Big Scripty Words for the Be Merry. And I'm also then going to be using Sprinkled with Joy just for the oven as well. Now that I've chosen my stamp sets, I can go ahead and start colouring in my images. So I just used my Misty stamping tool to stamp all of these images at once, just onto some white cardstock using some jet black ink. So I'm just going to go ahead and stamp those down once I've chosen all of the images I'm going to use. I'm using 3 mice and a couple of the utensils and the gingerbread house and the Christmas pudding and then the oven and desk. And once those are all stamped down, I'm going to colour these in with Copic markers just because they're my favourite and it's nice and easy. I'm going to start off with colouring in this desk. I'm using some E40s for this today. I'm using E47, E44, E43 and E42. I'm also going to be using the same brown colour combination for the oven handle and a couple of other little bits and pieces as well, but I just did that off camera since I forgot to colour it all at once. Once I finish colouring in the desk, or rather the counters, I'm going to colour in the gingerbread house and the utensil, so the wooden spoon, and the Christmas pudding base with some lighter E50s. I'm using E55, E53, E51 and E50 for those. I really wanted to make sure that I used a lot of different brown shades in this card, which is why I'm using the E50s here. I'm using some greens for a few of the details on the gingerbread house and the leaves of the holly, also details on the oven and one of the mice's dress. I'm using G28, YG67, YG63 and YG61 for those. Now moving on to colouring in some items red. So I'm colouring in the berries of the holly and the oven mitts and some of the lollies in the front of the gingerbread house with the red colour. I'm using R89, R29, R27 and I actually switched out R14 for R17 just because my marker was really low on ink and wasn't working properly, so I just changed that over. Once I finish colouring in the red details, I'm going to move on to colouring in some of the mice with some warmer greys. So for the mice, I used W7, W5, W3 and W1. And then for the third mouse and the bellies on the other 2 mice, I used W3, W1, W0 and W00. I wanted them all to be in the warm grey family, but I wanted some of them to be darker and some of them to be lighter. Now moving on to the oven, I did the exact same thing as I did with the mice. I'm using C7, C5, C3, C1 for all of the darker areas of the oven. And then for the main body of the oven, I decided to use the lighter C markers, which I used C3, C1, C0 and C00 for that. I just didn't show that on camera because it's basically the same thing as I'm doing here. Just adding in where the darkest areas would be and then blending all those colours together. I also did colour the handle of the whisk with the light, or with the darker cool greys rather. So now that all of my colouring has been completed, it's time to cut them all out, add some white details with a gel pen and now assemble my card. So here I'm starting off with the oven and the desk. As you can see, the desk is a lot smaller in comparison to the oven. So what I'm going to do is when I place it on my card, I'm just going to make sure that I place the oven a lot further down on the card and the counters higher up on the card, just so it sort of has the idea that the oven is sitting a lot further forward than the counters, and that's how I'm going to kind of overcome that. Also, it is just a card and the mice are very small in comparison to the oven as well, so it's a little bit whimsical and fun. It doesn't necessarily have to make complete sense, but I still really like how it turned out in the end. I've also then just pulled out some patterned paper. I pulled out the green and I pulled out the cream, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a little base for the oven and the counters to sit on. So that's what I'm using the cream color for, and then I just use the green as like the background or the wallpaper, I guess you could say, of the kitchen scene that I'm creating here. I'm just going to add some adhesive onto the back and adhere that down into place. For the desk, I decided to cut it in half because that fit perfectly behind the little oven here to show enough on either side, and I figured that it was a little bit easier than cutting out like two desks or colouring them in rather. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of place these on the cards to get a little bit of placement right. I'm going to add some foam tape onto the back of all of these pieces and adhere them down into place, making sure that the oven is pretty centered on the card. Once I have my base all figured out, I'm just going to add in a little accent images as well. So I'm not going to adhere these down at the start. I'm just going to place them down and kind of get a feel for where they're all going to sit. And then I can go ahead and adhere them later using a few different adhesives, like some glue tube adhesive and other flat adhesives, and also foam tape as well. I'm going to have these two little mice on the right hand side here and then one on the left. And then add little utensils as well to seem like they're holding them. Once I've gone ahead and figured out my scene and I like the placement, I'm going to go ahead and add foam tape and other adhesives onto the back and adhere them into place. And then I'm going to work on my sentiment. So I'm using the Winter Big Scripty Words sentiment set. And I really like this Be Merry, although I thought it got a little bit lost in the background. So I'm just going to quickly add some adhesive, some foam adhesive onto the back of the sentiment here. And then I'm going to work on a bit of an anchor for the sentiment just so I make sure that it stands out. So I really thought that it needed a little bit more red on this card because I only used a few little red accents in the colouring. So I pulled out some chili pepper cardstock and also some gold cardstock, and just at different widths, and I'm just going to add a little bit of adhesive onto the back, and I'm going to adhere these two strips together. When I adhered them together, I did make sure to just stagger them a little bit so I have more of the red showing and less of the gold. I also put the red piece to the left of the gold a little bit just to create a fun effect. I went ahead and adhered that down flat onto my card and then added the Be Merry sentiment on top that already had the foam tape on the back. I went ahead and cut off the excess from the right hand side, and that's how it looks when it's all completed. I just went ahead and added this piece onto a white card base to make it into an actual card. And that finishes up my card for today. I really enjoyed making this card. I loved pulling in the desks from another stamp set to create some counters. Even though they don't necessarily look like traditional counters, I still think the effect was quite fun to make. All of the supplies will be listed down below and listed over at the blog. And I will catch you all next time. Thanks so much for stopping by today.